Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. It's so nice to meet all these new colleagues and people at work in this important field. And I'm going to be talking about the overlap between ageism and ableism, because if you think about it, an awful lot of our fears about aging is actually about what's going to happen to our minds and bodies. And that's not ageism. It's ableism. It's not actually about age, because plenty of younger people live with disability, plenty of olders do not. It is a belief structure that being non-disabled is normal, and that leading desirable lives, including having meaningful jobs, means staying youthful and able-bodied and able-minded. And why is it important to distinguish between ageism and ableism? Because we need to understand what we're up against, including how we think about these things between our own ears. We are being ageist anytime we judge someone on the basis of how old we think they are, and ableist when we judge them, and we all do these things, on the basis of how we assume their minds or bodies function. And we're being ageist and ableist when we attribute capacity or incapacity to someone based on their age. So when people in retirement communities don't want walkers cluttering up the dining room, they're being ableist. When people who support community living for young people with disabilities think nursing homes are fine for older people with disabilities, they're being ageist. In the workforce, there are lots of ways in which it plays out. One example would be that if an employer doesn't want to hire an older person because they might retire soon, that's ageism. If they're worried that that employee might require special accommodations, it's ableism. And these things, these biases run so deep that we tend to act as though old people never become disabled and disabled people are never going to grow old. And an ageist and ableist culture gives us cover. Disability and aging are different, just as acquiring a disability is different from living with it lifelong. And we need, of course, to respect and acknowledge these differences. But disability and aging also overlap in ways that are important to learn from and build on. Because when we ignore the overlap, two things happen. We reinforce dual stigma, right? I may need help getting around, but at least I'm not in a wheelchair. Or I may be disabled, but at least I'm not old. And that's, of course, how prejudice works. It frames the other group, what we think of as another group, of course, although everyone gets older and almost everyone will encounter disability. It frames that other group as alien and lesser than ourselves, even though olders and people with disabilities are not other, they're us, our future us. And when we ignore the overlap between ageism and ableism, we rule out collective advocacy. For example, for decades, people with disabilities have been asking employers to make it possible to work from home. And when COVID hit and put the health of the general public at risk, magically these accommodations became possible practically overnight. So let's pressure companies to make these accommodations permanent, to keep everyone safe and to lower barriers to full employment. And of course, this relates to something I know others are going to talk about today, push back and demand the accessibility and flexibility that many older and disabled people require, and it benefits all workers. You all know that ageism and ableism create enormous barriers to employment. Disabled people are less likely to be employed at all ages than their non-disabled peers, which reflects stereotypes about capacity and performance. We know that it's harder for younger people to get a foothold in the job market. Ageism cuts both ways, right? And begin aging out. I mean, in tech, it can be as early as 35 that you are too old. And older workers, as Lily mentioned already in the introduction, it's less access to training, easily forced out of jobs, have a much harder time getting reemployed if we are laid off, and it's worse for women. And it's further compounded by race and class and so on. This discrimination is illegal, it's punitive, it's costly. Here's a killer figure, $850 billion. That's what AARP, an AARP study that just came out, said that a bias against older workers cost the US economy in 2018 to $850 billion for 1 year in the US. Right? So imagine the global total, and of course that doesn't factor in the human cost. COVID I don't think made ageism worse or ableism worse. I think it exposed the biases that have been around us all along, just as it shone a light on racism, especially here in the US. And it is giving us a historic opportunity to build on that awareness. So I'm going to leave you with a very big idea before I hand the mic over to my colleague, Sheila Callahan. In the Paleolithic era, the emergence of a third generation enabled humans to flourish. That's when writing happened. That's when music emerged. And the emergence of 4 and even 5 living generations in our lifespan is another tectonic shift. The workplace of the future is going to contain 18-year-olds and 80-year-olds, a 7-decade span. Of course, this poses challenges. It also poses, I think, analogous, incredible opportunities because of everything we know about the advantages of diverse workplaces, which of course includes age. And my colleague, Sheila Callahan of the Age Equity Alliance, is going to talk about some of those opportunities. Thank you.